everybody here. Today, we've got a wonderful panel that's going to be joining us. And then for you all that are listening, we're going to have an opportunity for you to do some Q&A, just a little bit of housekeeping. James and I are going to be monitoring some questions that you may have as you come up. And so we may interject with our panelists to throw those questions at them, but we may not. And but please keep your questions coming. And so why are we doing this in the first place? And I think you've heard some of you that were on that all the major teacher unions and education worker unions have called for and are basically in legal strike positions. And we are, what we see happening in the classroom, I know for myself as a classroom teacher and someone as a executive officer with the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, I get to go around and talk to teachers every day. What we're seeing in classrooms is that there is a significant need for more resources for our children with special ed. We know right now that many of our children come to school with highly complex needs, and that what we need are psychologists, we need child and youth workers, we need social workers, we need special needs assistants, we need educational assistants in these schools, in these classrooms. And what we're seeing is just the opposite, that they're cutting them. Right now, what happened at the elementary level, what's happened, the distance that's happened between us and the government is that the government wants to remove all language around class size. That's what's happened. And that's what made us have to go to our membership and say, we need your voice. We need you to say no to this government. And so, today we have on the line that's going to be speaking with us, Barbara Madeloni, who's going to be sharing with us some of the work that she's been doing. She's a two-term president down at the Massachusetts Teachers Union. Barbara's focused on supporting locals and involved members to build power and draw national acclaim for fighting off well-funded ballot initiative that would have ramped up a school privatization. Most of you know the Laura Walton. Woo! Big shout out to Laura, president of CUPE Education Workers, and their huge win. The government thought that they were going to try to just trample over the lowest paid education workers in Ontario, but instead they showed their muscles. They partnered with parents, and they overcame this. And so we're looking forward to hearing from Laura a little bit later. And then also we've got high school teacher Melanie Wilson, and elementary teacher Laura McCoy of the Ontario Education Workers United, which is a grassroots network of teachers and education workers from across Ontario. OEWU includes members of all education unions working collaboratively with parents, education allies to protect and fight for a strong publicly funded K-12 education system. So, Barbara, we're looking forward for you to sharing how you guys fought back down in the U.S. and to help give us some ways of looking forward to really pushing back against this government that's trying to really enforce an austerity budget. Welcome, Barbara.
Thanks, Nigel. Hi, everybody. Delighted to be talking to our northern neighbors from here in Massachusetts. And actually, just for a little clarity, I'm no longer the president of the Mass Teachers Association. I turned out, and I'm now working for an organization called Labor Notes, which is a publication and education project that works on supporting and building rank and file democratic and militant unions. So I think you'll hear that a little bit in what I have to say. I want to bring forward 4 examples really quickly, and then maybe we can talk more about them when we get into the Q&A. First, really briefly, as Nigel mentioned, when I was president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, I was elected as an insurgent candidate on a progressive, actually not a slate, I was an independent candidate looking to just grow the caucus, and lo and behold, I won. But I became president of a union, largest union in Massachusetts, that had really been conciliatory for decades and really was an active participant in the undermining of public education and our unions by always arguing for the best, worst deal that they could get rather than taking on a fight. Shortly after I won, there was an effort to put a ballot, there was a ballot question in the November 16 election, which would have increased the number of charter schools in Massachusetts exponentially. It was clear to us that this ballot initiative, which was funded by the Walton family, by the Koch brothers, by Wall Street, to the tune of $30 million, was designed to go after Massachusetts, which has a reputation for high quality public education, and in taking us down, set off a string that would really be destructive throughout the country. And also that they fully anticipated that I would say, oh, geez, that's really scary. We better not do that, we'll lose. But instead we said, no, we're gonna fight. And in March of 2016, we were losing at the polls 54-36. And in November 2016, one of the bright spots of that miserable day, we won 61-39. We did that by talking to parents. We did that by educating members about the impact of charter schools on everybody's budgets, and then going out, and our members knocked on doors, they made phone calls, and they found in doing that that the people of Massachusetts really believe in public education. They didn't want privatizers coming in. Even charter school parents said, we actually support public education and would prefer that we had fully funded public schools. So including parents, talking to parents is an absolutely key part of the work that we do. In January of this year, the United Teachers of Los Angeles had a monumental strike. They were out for 6 days, and they struck for many of the things that you're striking for, although yours is a defensive battle to keep them from getting rid of class size caps. They were looking to even have class size caps. They did an amazing job, again, educating the community and bringing the community into even their bargaining. So when they were going into contract bargaining, they had sessions with parents and students saying, what are the things that you think we should put in our contract? We want to fight for you. So they extended the range of what they were bargaining for, and they really made it clear that they were fighting for the students. They were centering the students and the community in their struggle. Really quick story to tell you about how successful they were in bringing the community in and educating the community about what they were up against. They had a billionaire superintendent who had been appointed by a school board that had won, the charter school proponents had won the majority of school board seats after spending $15 million to get people elected so that they could charterize LA schools. I was in LA for the strike. I had to come back to New York. I went back to LA during the strike. I'm renting a car. Two guys are there, 5 o'clock in the morning. One guy says, why are you wearing a UTLA shirt? I said, well, I'm here to support the strike. Guy says, well, you're from Massachusetts. Why would you come from Massachusetts to support a strike in California? The other guy says, I say, well, because this is a really important strike. The other guy goes, well, what do you mean it's important? The other guy says, because the privatizers, the corporate privatizers, are coming into LA and they're looking to overtake our public schools and privatize all of our schools and bust our unions. Their education with the community was so significant that a guy at 5 o'clock in the morning at a car rental counter understood exactly what it meant. And they went out and they had a monumental victory. Then we just recently had Chicago that just finished an 11-day strike. Whereas the MTA win was about knocking on doors and communicating with parents and accessing the belief in public education, and UTLA was bringing the community in and educating the community, Chicago was about power. And I think as you prepare to think about your strike, you need to look at Chicago because ultimately it's going to come down to power. Chicago won a big strike in 2012 under a progressive caucus. 7 years later, they've been able to build from that strike and use their power even while they've been under a tremendous assault by privatizers. Even after they won the strike in 2012, the city closed 50 public schools. They've been attacking the union relentlessly and attacking the community. But what the union has done successfully, again, is they were very clear to name the ways that austerity is about racism, that there is no austerity that there is money out there, that Chicago is one of the richest cities in the world, and it was racist practices that were keeping the city from fully funding the public schools. And so they continually connected the issues around class size, the issues around special ed services to broader political issues. And in doing that, they brought the community in with them. But it was a real power struggle. Because of the power they built, they were able to elect a mayor who was a liberal, who ran on a platform that said that she was going to support the Chicago public schools. And that was like, they had forced politicians into that position. The politicians were still only there to protect the elite. So even though she had promised those things, she wasn't actually going to take the money that Chicago was giving to real estate developers and give it to the public schools. So they had a protracted 11-day struggle in Chicago, where they ended up winning caps on class sizes, where they ended up winning more services for special ed students and more time to serve those students, where they ended up winning more services for homeless students, where they ended up raising significantly the salaries of the lowest paid workers in the Chicago public schools. But they did it because they understood that they needed to assert the full power of their collective action. And after day 6, when the mayor and the city was refusing to negotiate, they said, let's hold civil disobedience trainings. And they had hundreds of people show up. And that was their statement to say to them, we're committed to this. And this is how deeply we're committed to it. The last thing I want to say, and I'm running through these quickly, but they're 3 really important examples, is that here in Massachusetts, just a few weeks ago, striking by public sector workers is illegal in Massachusetts. And we had a very small local, Dedham, just south of Boston, about 300 members go out on strike. And we hadn't had the teachers union go out and strike in 10 years here in Massachusetts. It was a really big deal. They went out, they took a strike vote on Thursday. They went out on Friday because they didn't want the superintendent to have an opportunity to tag them with too many injunctions. And they had settled by Sunday. And, you know, they did that. It seems so fast and wonderful and beautiful. And I don't want you all, Chicago took 11 days. So we know this can be a protracted struggle. But in talking to the leadership in Dedham, I think a thing that he talked about that's really important, and even though it's a strong local and you're dealing with something that's across the province, that you have to do in your areas what he did in Dedham, which is that he talked to everybody. And everybody talked to each other. They had deep connections with each other that were intentional and direct, and were always honest, and were always transparent. In UTLA and in Dedham, open bargaining was a key part of their campaign. Transparency with members being intimately involved in decision-making was absolutely essential. I have lots more to say about how to build towards a campaign, but we'll talk about that later. I want to make sure there's time for other panelists. Thanks.
Oh, Nigel, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara. You know, just before we go away from you, and we're gonna have lots of time for lots of questions, and thanks for all those that have already been in the chat room putting up questions. I know that Melanie has already responded to Michaela, but Barbara, one of the questions we did get was like, how do you, like, how are we going to convince our coworkers, some of our coworkers, that organizing, the deep organizing, the worker, talking member to member is the way forward, is the formula that we need to do. Do you want to quickly touch on that, and then we'll jump over the
quick answer there is that it's not about persuading people. It's about giving people an opportunity to have that experience. So those of us who are organizers need to go out and need to talk to members. And I think one of the most important questions I've recently discovered to ask people is if there's anything that you would change, what would it be? Because we get locked into thinking that we can't change anything. And what UTLA did, what Chicago did, what Dedham did, and just examples, and what we did in Massachusetts with the ballot question is we dared to think much bigger than we were told we were allowed to think. I was told we couldn't win at the ballot. Sat in the Senate president's office, said, don't do this. And I said, no, I actually believe in the people of Massachusetts. I think we can do this. So we as organizers have to act in a deep faith in what's possible and give people an experience of what's possible. And that's through, we have the conversations, even if they're not ready to have them yet.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you. Next speaker, I'm so excited to also introduce Laura. Laura Walton was elected president of CUPE in 2019, first having served as its vice president. Formerly, she was president of CUPE 1022, which represents education workers at Hastings and Prince Edward County District School Board, a native of Belleville, Ontario. Laura is proud of her rural roots. I know, us city folk, anyway. She's worked in radio and marketing and educational assistant to children with special needs. This fall, Laura, leading to a freely negotiated collective agreement that secured investment in our school and education work. President, her commitment, creativity, and unshakable belief in the power of public education. Laura, thank you so much for making time.
No
I know you're traveling where are you tonight? You're like everywhere.
No, tonight I'm in Markham. I'm back in the GTA now. OFL, we have the Ontario Federation of Labor convention next week. So I'm grounded in the GTA for the next at least 10 days. So I'm kind of excited to be in my new transplanted home after being a bit all over the place. And first of all, I wanted to do a shout out to Barbara. I was super excited to hear that I was sharing time with her because one of the keys to our success was a little book. It's $15, and this is a shameless plug for Labor Notes, and I'm not ashamed to do it, called Secrets of a Successful Organizer. And because I truly believe that the concept of organizing has become a thing of the past, and we've shelved it in our unions, and we've started to become more institutions instead of organizations and movements. And so when I took over a year ago, it's actually been 53 weeks I've been president. We really put the focus on organization and mobilization from the very key, because I truly believe that any bargaining table, it's not the 10 people sitting around the table that get the deals, it's the people on the streets that get the deals for you. And so that was a shift in our culture to be able to do that. So thank you, Barbara and Labor Notes, for putting out some of the best resources. I highly suggest folks check them out. I'm on their email blasts. I use it quite often and refer to it in the work that we do. So thank you. So what did we do, folks? For those who don't know, we represent 55,000 education workers across the province. We're in 109 bargaining units in all 4 school systems. So we work in 2 languages at all times. We're part of a bigger group, CUPE in Ontario itself. It represents 270,000 public service workers in municipal, healthcare, education, universities, and social services. And then we're part of 670,000 union members across Canada who are represented by CUPE as well, including those groups, but also we have flight attendants as well. So it's a big happy family, but we had to focus on this little group of 55,000 folks right now. And I think there's a number of things that Barbara said that really rang true to me. And our goal was to get out of our offices and get into the streets and get out and talk to people. So when we started, we had next to nothing for a budget. Our organization had only been around for just under a year. And so we were very slow starting, and people really like the advertisements and the radio advertisements and the billboards. And we had to say, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about earned media, and we're going to talk about putting the money into the human resources that we felt needed to be done. So the first thing we did was book off people. But we decided to take a different route, and we decided to look for those leaders in the workplaces that weren't already part of executives, that weren't part of maybe PAC committees, that weren't maybe part of steward committees, but those leaders that are in the workplaces that have voices, that have opinions, that we could start talking to. And what we found is that, much like Barbara said, people want to tell you their stories. People want to be involved, but you need to go out and ask them. So we spent a great deal of time with my fabulous member engagement chair, reaching out to people and asking them, would you help us out? Would you help us out? Would you go and talk to people? Would you go and talk to parents? Would you go and talk to trustees and MPPs? And what was amazing is they did. And we asked members to do this when 70% of our membership was on layoff. So these are folks that are not receiving any money from the employer. They are on EI in some cases, so it was always a bit of a tiptoe so that we weren't appearing like they were interfering with their ability to qualify for employment insurance. But we had people going out everywhere, and they became magical. They became so creative. They started to talk to members about not just what the union meant for them, but they started to ask what their families were about. And, you know, did your son or daughter play soccer or baseball, or what did they do in the summer? And with that, they started attending soccer games where they brought freezers of coolers of freezies to hand out to kids. And that gave them an opportunity to start talking to parents about the work that we needed to do. When we started this, as my teaching colleagues would know, in Ontario, they talk a lot about teachers when they talk about the education system. And education workers tend to be kind of the missing group in this equation. And we really had to focus on the fact that we needed to make sure that people knew that we were out there. And then when they knew that we were out there, we had to distinguish ourselves. And so many folks assumed that we were bringing in a similar wage as teachers. And so we had to work really hard to explain to them that our folks only make $38,000 a year and are historically the first group that is attacked whenever there is the need to cut services in our schools, which has really led to a decline of the services that we can provide, a decline in the state of our buildings, because we're not able to keep those up in the way that we want to, a decline in the supports that students are receiving in schools, but also we brought it back to the services that we provide our students, our schools, and our communities. From the very get-go, we also, I was very clear to our crew that I believe that we are a team in the schools with our teaching colleagues, and we would be a team in the streets if we needed to be with our teaching colleagues. And we have stood by that, which led to some concern by the government and the Council of Trustees Association, because they believed that they were going to be able to come into our bargaining table and basically force us to take something because they didn't think that we had the connection with the larger group, which was the teachers that was coming in behind us. And we really decided that we didn't care what the government had to say. We didn't care what the employer had to say, that we were going to stay true to our working colleagues, and we were going to stay true to the parents in the communities who believed in us and believed in the work that we were doing. And we were going to demand better. And much like Barbara referred to, many of these fights that you're hearing about, it's because people have said that they are going to demand better, not just for ourselves, but we're demanding better for our students, because quite frankly, to do anything less isn't good enough. And I think Michaela had a wonderful question about how do you convince people to, you know, do the new thing. And I do agree that it's not about convincing people. But I think one of the biggest mistakes we do is believing that we need to do things like we've always done. And some of the greatest changes that we've seen in our society is because somebody stood up and said, I'm not going to do it the way that it's always been done. I'm going to demand better. And I think that demanding better is a theme that we're hearing throughout Ontario education. And it's something that the government doesn't know what to do, because this isn't about greedy education workers. This is about education workers demanding better for our communities. And that's something that the government, the Conservative government of the day, you know, who totes themselves as for the people, they don't have any sort of rhetoric to answer to that. And so I really, encourage people, as much as, you know, it's easy to get focused on what am I getting out of it, to always remember that the reason why we do the work that we do, being educators, is because of the children, and that, you know, we need to be demanding better for them. So I think One of the things that people asked us is, why was it so important to be prepared to strike? And I have a mentor once who told me that the best way to avoid a strike is to be so prepared for one. And I can tell you that we had 55,000 people across the streets, across the province, who were ready to hit the streets on Monday. They were more than ready. If anything, we've actually had to bring them back down a bit because we didn't go out. We needed to be very clear that we were prepared to strike. We needed to be very clear to the employer and to the Crown. But before we did anything, we took it to the parents. We took our work to rule to the parents. We took our work to rule to our teaching allies and said, hey, you know, what do you think about this? When we made the decision to cut our work to rule short, when it was like 4 days in, it was directly because of reports that we were getting back in from our teaching colleagues and from our parents, where we realized that employers were using our work to rule to put children in jeopardy. And we were not willing to stand by and have that happen. So that's why we moved to going to a full-on strike. Fortunately, I think the government and the CTA came to their senses when school boards across the province started to notify everyone that they were closing schools because they would not work while our members were not in there. And that was a pretty empowering time, that for the first time ever in my history of over 15 years in the education system, that people recognized us as being important. And that is, it was a big time and an emotional time for a lot of us to be recognized in that way. But yeah, that's because we had to believe that we were going to be going out. And I used to tell people, never let them see you blink. Just keep pushing it, keep walking it, and keep talking. And one of the takeaways that we have right now is that I want people to realize that this was just one piece of our agenda. We're not done. We're not done until all of our teaching colleagues are done. We're not done until local agreements are done. We're not done until we start demanding better within policy of this government. We need to stop believing that the only time that we make gains for the education system is around a bargaining table. We need to be making sure that the government understands that we're watching their every move, and that, you know, even if we sign a collective agreement like we have, that, you know, we are going to be holding them accountable. And then our next goal is to make sure that that government is not here again in 2022. And that we have a far more progressive government in, because I think all of us have seen over the last 20 years what two different governments have done to us, which is essentially decimate the, or try to decimate the education system. And somebody said to me once, teachers and education workers have made this education system prosper in spite of the government and not because of what the government has done for us. And so I think that's a really powerful statement to remember, that, you know, we've been pushing back since the beginning, and we're going to continue to push back, and we'll be there. You know, I know it's a busy day. We're looking forward to next Tuesday when our ETFO folks go out and start their job action. We will be there 100% behind them. We're waiting to hear from OSSTF and OEWU, also from our French counterparts in the AEFO. You know, we are there, and we're ready to go, willing and ready to help you out in any way that you need us. We've got a few burn barrels, so if you need those, we've got those too.
Hey, thanks, Laura. You know, Andrea just asked the question that was going through my mind about, you know, what is our biggest strength right now? And, you know, before we maybe like touching on that quick question, I also wanted to use my privilege of being the moderator today to ask about the moment, because there was this moment on that Sunday before you guys were supposed to go out. And the Ontario Families for Public Education, along with the West End Parents for Public Education, sent out this all call. Yeah. And they said, we need everybody to show up on Sunday morning. Yeah. And so that Sunday morning, you know, I remember I dragged my 4-year-old. Well, I didn't drag because he actually loves it now. Down to the Sheraton Center. And, you know, there was a whole bunch of us that were there, parents and their children. You know, there was at least 500 of us outside of that hotel, and that the media was there. Tell me, like, what was that moment like for you guys as a negotiating team?
So I have
and what effect did that have on the negotiation?
So I have a funny story about that, actually, because that rally came about. It was magical that rally came about so quickly, but I think it's really a testament to the power of working with your community. and relying on your community and the community organizers to make magic happen. The arbitrator at the time on Saturday had told me, Laura, you're going to put 55,000 people out on the street and the public doesn't have your back at all. And I remember taking a deep breath and saying, and making a call to my member engagement chair saying, you need to come for a coffee. And I said to him, what am I going to do? Like, I know the parents support us. What are we going to do? And he said, let me go and have a chat with the parents groups. Within 2 hours, West End Parents Association and the Ontario Parents for Public Education, they did this magical outreach on social media. Like, it was crazy. And it was so funny because it got to the employer, to the Council of Trustees Association and to the Crown before I even saw it. And the mediator came in, the arbitrator came in and he said, well, this is ridiculous. And I said, what is ridiculous? And he said, well, you're having a rally. I said, how can I have a rally? I'm sitting here at the bargaining table. He said, nope, there's parents coming and they're having a rally, and the Crown and the CTA are threatening to leave for the evening because they're afraid for their safety. And I looked at him and I said, they're afraid of parents, and that's why we're sitting here today. And so we then started to do memes like Game of Thrones, where the parents are coming instead of winter's coming, because essentially the power that you folks had, I don't know if parents really understood it, but 400 people with strollers, with handmade signs, with voices showing up at the Sheraton. They put the Crown and the Council of Trustees demanded that the hotel put us on lockdown so that they would be safe. And at that moment we knew, I know it's ridiculous, and at that moment we knew, we were heading the right way. And it definitely was one of the reasons why I said, and I can remember because as it got on later in the evening and we were fighting over investment money coming back, I'm like, I can call them back, we can bring those parents back if that's what we need. And we were able to get there. And yes, my members were terrific and our members were super organized, but their organization and their mobilization showed through the amount of community outreach that we had. And the fact that it wasn't a bunch of union talking heads out in front of a hotel, but the community who realized that we had 55,000 low-paid workers that were going to go out on strike for no other reason than we believed that there needed to be services in our schools and that our children were not receiving the services that they deserve. And it was magical. I'm not going to lie. It was probably one of the most magical moments I've had in my career to date.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Hey, so next on our panel are two of my favorite activists, Laura McCoy and Melanie Wilson. Laura is an elementary school teacher at the Toronto District School Board. Melanie is a high school teacher with the Toronto District School Board. Both are parents who have children that went through the system also. And they are here to share with us some of the work that's being done right now with the Ontario Education Workers United, the pledge that they have going. Let's hear it. What's going on and how are we going to keep building?
Thanks, Nigel. So I'll start us off. As Nigel said, I'm an elementary school teacher and I have two children, one who's in university now, but my daughter is still in elementary school. And back in the spring, we got together, some parents and some teachers in the neighborhood, to talk about what was happening in public education and what could we do to fight back against the cuts. And this was a group that was parents, teachers, education workers, and just generally concerned people. That group was basically became the West End Parents and the Ontario Parents for Public Education as they grew across the province. But then the teachers and education workers from that group got together and decided to work together from that perspective and to try to work as a group so that we could bring together teachers from the various different unions, from ETFO, OSSTF, from CUPE and OEWU. And so we formed the Ontario Education Workers United. One of the first things that we did was come up with this idea of a pledge. So the pledge essentially says that we're prepared to take action, collective action, including strike action, until all the cuts to education are reversed and the Ontario government reinvests in the schools and communities that our students deserve. So it's an idea of reinforcing and standing behind our union leadership in bargaining and bringing to the front the idea of reversing the cuts, because we know that cuts have been made to education that are sort of outside the purview of our bargaining at this point, but we're sort of ended up bargaining in a smaller space because cuts were made before we even got to that point. So we wanted to bring to the front this idea of the reversal of cuts to education. So we've been working on the pledge through the summer and into the fall. We're using it as a mobilization tool, so we can talk to our members. We've got it online and we've been having it in paper form as well. We've had days of organizing training in the summer. We've got a Linktree site and a Facebook group. Basically working together to mobilize memberships and support our union leadership. We're using it as a way to educate our members politically in terms of the anti-austerity agenda. We're using it as a media tool so we can get some of this information out into the public. And building solidarity between unions, which I think is really crucial because we are on a similar timeline at this point. CUPE kind of led the way, and the rest of us are in the point where we are in very soon in legal strike positions, if not already. And so we're hoping the group, the OEWU and the pledge, are going to allow us to sort of build the conversation and support our bargaining team and our union executive to fight for the reversal of the cuts to education, to build positive schools and really to support public education. So I'll turn it over to Mel, who can add a little bit more to that discussion.
Yeah, so hearing from Barbara and Laura, the pledge I'm going to focus on as well has just been such an important tool to talk about bargaining for the common good and what our priorities are, and to try and do that both with the public and with our fellow education workers. So to cut through the misinformation that we're hearing so much of from the provincial government, from the minister again today, talking to friends and family so often, people, even at when I'm dropping my own children off at school, parents will say, oh, isn't bargaining over? Because they, hear that CUPE has settled. So it's just, I think it's a tool for those face-to-face conversations, both with our coworkers in the schools and then outside in the community. So our hope tonight also is just to use this as an opportunity to share some of those resources and to put out there to all education workers who are listening in. We'd really love to see this printed out and circulated so that these conversations are happening in every workroom, staff room, hallway. I think what Barbara was saying earlier about how there is a feeling often that we don't stand a chance and that we just hear cut after cut after cut, and that we don't have the experiences often of feeling our own power. And so being able to share some of these inspirational stories and hear what teachers have just won in Chicago, what they won in LA, what you won in Massachusetts, like these are stories that we need to be broadcasting loud and clear, as well as the CUPE. Recent CUPE win has been such a powerful example to share and to talk to my coworkers about, to build our own hope and then to raise our own expectations, because we really want to convey that no cut to education is acceptable. And in fact, we need investment in our schools, and that's not unreasonable or pie in the sky, but it's, it should be what we expect, right? And I think forefronting the anti-austerity education as well is key. I think the Ford government, as many governments do, a really good job of creating fear about deficits and overspending. So for me, a key part of those organizing conversations with the pledge is saying, no, in fact, Ontario is rich, and the Ford government is making tax cuts for corporations and the rich, and we can absolutely afford public education. And as a parent and as an education worker, I expect nothing less than a full investment. So I'm just going to test out this screen sharing sharing here. Is it going to come up? Oh boy. Okay, maybe not. Hang on, sorry, one moment here. Okay, I am still learning. So you know what, I'll talk about something other than the pledge. So please do visit the OEWU link tree /OEWU with all kinds of resources, including the PDF that you can print out. Is everyone
Yeah,
seeing this now?
We can see
Okay,
it.
great.
We can see
So
it.
this is another thing.
Be careful what you show.
Yes, exactly. So this is another initiative, a social media campaign that again is about like frontline workers feeling like gaining the confidence to be advocates. So this is going to come out in the next day or two, and has already been tested out by a school in Mississauga here, where they've just had all their teachers sign this saying no contract without a full reversal of the cuts. So we're not willing to accept any of these cuts. We need we're not willing to lose one teacher, education worker, child and youth worker, guidance counselor in our schools, and then to post these to social media and to share those. And then they've also, here they are in their library, having people sign, and then they put together these great signs: my students deserve, and my greatest fear. So you can see a whole bunch of teachers here sharing their voices and hearing from those frontline education workers about what these cuts will mean. And for us to recognize as teachers that we are experts, that we experience, like we're living this, students are experts, parents are experts. We know while the government might say that class size doesn't matter, that it absolutely does, because we live it every day, and we'll see the chaos that will ensue if class sizes rise to 40 plus, right? So anyway, you can see this, it'll be shared, and we'd love to see this happening in every school across Ontario. This is again in Mississauga. Here we go, I have found it. So this is the OEWU Linktree page, and you can find resources on here, going back to Michaela's point about how to, what if you don't feel like workers at your school are on board? There's some great resources in here, including starting up a school action team, so you might feel less isolated in the work that you're doing, and building that team. Because I know that experience of feeling like I'm in a fairly conservative workspace perhaps, but then when you start that conversation going, it's amazing how people start coming out of the woodwork, and especially when we're able to translate some of the confusing information from the government, to know what is at stake, what is at stake for our working conditions. Many education workers are also parents and care about their kids having the same quality of education that we enjoyed growing up. So all of that. I will try one more piece here. So you can see here that there is, here we go, share. On this link tree, you can see that there is the link to the digital education worker pledge, and it's just a Google form, and that also enables us to build this network of people who share those values, who want to see frontline workers speaking up and really actively involved as advocates for public education, connecting with parents meaningfully, and then to encourage everyone who is not already to join this our Facebook group that is growing, our shared collective Facebook group, and make sure to answer those 3 screening questions, because it is for members of education unions. But it's really neat, the cross-pollination that is happening on the site, on the web, on the Facebook page, people sharing actions that they're doing at their school, and also rank and file frontline workers talking about strategy, which is something that there's not a lot of space for necessarily, but people sharing their opinions and their ideas. And I think I'm learning so much from education workers all across the province through that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks, Mel. And thanks, Laura. Like remember, these are 2 classroom teachers. So they are like lesson planning, and they are doing all of their stuff, and of course taking care of families, and still doing this activist work. So thank you so much for that. One of the groups that we're partnered here with today is the LEAP. And I know most of us when we think of the LEAP, of course, we're thinking of Naomi Klein and Avi and all of the work that they're doing around the environment and the Green New Deal. But really, this is about how do we merge all of our different struggles. And it's wonderful to have with us James Hutt, who is from the LEAP, who's been helping to pull this together. And James, maybe you could share kind of with us, why is it that the LEAP has been interested in this teacher organizing?
Thank you for that, Nigel. I'm really honored and humbled to be here sharing the screen with so many great organizers and educators tonight. It's really inspiring. For us here at the LEAP, Nigel, you put it quite well, we work to make system change irresistible. And so we work to connect disparate social movements and ideas and to create a robust vision of a world based on caring for the earth and each other. So we're trying to tackle the biggest crises of our time: inequality, climate change, racism and sexism, and bring people together to do it all at once. And so when I heard about the work that Melanie and others were doing, and Laura and others were doing in Ontario, it was just inspiring and immediately drew me to the possibilities of it. Because if we're talking about, a just world based on renewable energy and one that averts the climate crisis, what could be more important than education? What could be more important than making sure that our future generations have an opportunity to thrive? And often when we're talking about green jobs or climate work, teaching is already good for the community and it's already low carbon. And we see the amazing stuff that other teachers are doing, whether in Chicago in terms of putting affordable housing, or in LA in terms of getting more green space, or even Barbara's union. I think they recently passed a motion last summer about a national teacher strike for a Green New Deal. Education is a driving force for all sorts of positive changes we want. So we're honored to be working with education workers and teachers tonight.
Well, thanks very much, James. Really, really appreciate it, and looking forward for us to continue building. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, look, what's the sense in building a strong school if we don't have clean air to breathe or clean water to drink? Barbara and Laura, you guys have sat across the table from these, lawyers and government people that are negotiating and trying to, make our class sizes smaller. Can you tell us, what's your experience? Because it seems when we hear these government people on and their spokespeople, they're not telling the truth. They seem to be lying. How are we as regular classroom teachers supposed to deal with this? Because I talk to teachers all the time. They're telling me they're lying. Why don't you guys do something about it? What can we do about that?
So I can speak from the Ontario perspective. I've sat across the bargaining table from a Liberal government and a Conservative government, and in both the last 2 rounds of central bargaining. The one thing that I remind myself is that they're telling their truth. And it's not necessarily that it's a lie, but it's the truth that they've allowed themselves to believe. And we have our truth, and we need to make sure that our truth is out there and that parents and communities are understanding our truth. In their minds, they truly do believe that there's a crisis with the deficit. They do believe that there is, we've got to keep pandering to corporations and giving them tax cuts, because if we don't, then they'll all leave. And we can't worry about climate change because, that's not really a factor. They do believe this is the rhetoric. The one thing that I always say about Stephen Leche, other than I still haven't seen the man more than once in my life, is that he is very good at staying on message. And if you note, Stephen, the reason why he does well is because he has a message and he sticks to it. One of the things I encourage folks is to find what your message is and stick to it just as adamantly. And too often we allow ourselves to get off of our message trying to cut down somebody else's message. And what we found really effective was staying the course on our message and not letting ourselves be swayed by what the government was trying to say or what the employer was trying to say. We knew that we had our truth. We knew that our truth was acceptable and palatable to parents. And so we stayed the course. And I encourage people, don't get caught up in the spin doctoring that is happening by everybody else. Know what your truth is and continue to stay on message with your truth. Because that resonates far more with parents, far more with the community than anything else.
Thank you. Barbara, just before you answer, I also wanted to add a little bit onto that, just because, in Ontario, many teachers, and I know that, you know, the phone lines are going to blow up now when I say this, you know, but I think many teachers in Ontario, we have like small C conservatives or large L liberals that make up education workers here in Canada. I mean, they're still pretty left of the Democrats in the States, but still. But Barbara, like you mentioned that teachers in your state went on strike, which is also illegal in Massachusetts. To what extent do we need to be willing to break unjust rules like back to work legislation to win what we need?
Okay, I really want to get to that, but I really want to answer your first question, so I'll try to be,
Thank you.
because I'm actually not interested in the politicians at all. I was known when I was the president of the MTA for very rarely going to the State House, and for not necessarily encourage my members to go to the State House. I believe that, like, what that perpetuates is the idea that they have the power, and we're actually like asking them to do something for us instead of that we have the power, and we have to make our demands clear, and we have to organize collectively, and we have to make them come to us. That's what a strike does, is it makes them come to us, not us go to them. We are the people who have power. I also think Laura's very generous about how she understands their truth, but so I used to regularly say that we just don't share the same values, and we're not looking for the same thing. And let's be really clear about what we stand for and what we want in the world that we want to build, as James suggests, and what we need to do to build that world. It's not about getting them to do it. It's about doing it so that then they're doing our bidding. I also want to say, when you talk about sort of the small C conservatives, large L liberals, you know, to that, I think that to the degree that we, and I'm careful about saying this at this moment in history of the U.S. and therefore the world, like to the degree that we're thinking about electoral politics, I don't think we're thinking clearly enough about our power, and I don't think we're helping each other identify the issues that unite us. That I think that people across political spectrums share concern for public education. Mm-hmm. They want not just their child, but they want children to be healthy and safe and happy. And our job as organizers is to access that sense of what's possible in the world. I think we live under capitalism in a sense that just shrinks our sense of what's possible for how we can engage the world. And what we can do, and we do it as educators, so we're good organizers that way. Because as educators, we encourage, we find the possibility in young people and invite them to live that possibility. And we want to do the same thing for workers and communities. And in order to do that, we're going to have to break laws. Because the laws are designed to protect the elite and the people in power. They're not designed for us. And the only way laws change is when we break them. And when we break them, there's nothing they could do. All the red state strikes in the US last year were illegal. West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arizona, illegal strikes. Nobody lost their job. Why did nobody lose their job? Because everybody went on strike. So we have to engage in actions that bring people to that level of trust and solidarity, so that they can walk out. That doesn't happen overnight. But we have tremendous power. And as Laura said, we don't even understand our power. They're scared to leave the hotel. I mean, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Yeah, totally. You know, Mel, Laura, I know our time is starting to get a little short, but I wanted to get you guys, because Barbara and Laura mentioned some very kind of, you know, powerful words around that I think touch on that thing around courage. So mm-hmm. You're both classroom teachers. What do you think about, you know, what will it take for classroom teachers to do some of the things that Barbara's mentioned, and maybe mm-hmm. and certainly what speaking back to power, like Laura's been talking about.
Yeah, I think I think the conversations that we are having is what it's going to take, or it's a start anyway. And I think in this situation at this point in time, with the Ford government and the drastic cuts, that teachers are united in a way that we haven't been in the last little bit. And I think the fact that we feel the support of the parents is giving people courage. And I think that's what we need. We do need the courage. So I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think continuing on sharing the stories, having the conversations, having moments that bring us together so that nobody feels alone, because I think people can't, they can't imagine taking an action alone, but they know that if we're all in this together, like here in Ontario, we have massive numbers, and when we look at the stories in the United States, or we look at CUPE and how people really came together, and we look at the parent organizing, and we feel that strength in numbers, I'm hopeful that that's what will move us forward and will allow us to take some really strong action. And knowing that the Ford government is not popular, I mean, it's harming so many people, that hopefully that is what will bring us together and allow us to take some really strong action.
I would like personally to see, I think we gain courage through taking action. So I know that, when we were out there at Queen's Park on April 6th and taking the subway down there, or taking the GO train in, and it was just jam packed with parents and education workers, I think that was an opportunity where people really felt our numbers, that we were the majority and that people were not okay with these cuts. And we know that, polling says that the public is against these education cuts. And then we see it with, online and in-person activism of parents speaking out, and then through the school walk-ins, right? We did them in the spring and then again in the fall. And that was an opportunity for parents and students and education workers from all unions to be out there, maybe for their first time ever at a protest, and feeling like this is something that you can do, and that's something that you will be respected for when you hear, hand a flyer to someone passing by and they agree with you because their kids are in the education system. And then we've also learned, I would love to see a lot more public outreach days. So we have this at the secondary level, we've moved towards a more transparent form of bargaining, which is excellent and so exciting, and helps us communicate to the public what our priorities are and that our interests are very much shared. But so few people are actually downloading those briefs online, and we need to be out on the street. Like, many people don't have the time to listen to the news adequately, right? So we need to be translating what these cuts are going to mean for our day-to-day lives as education workers, but as community members and as students. So I'd love to see just a proliferation of these public outreach days and talking to people, and then through doing that, building up our courage and confidence as education workers to see ourselves as advocates for this, and then that does further build our courage when people are happy to sign your petition, or thank you for being out there, and wish you luck. It gives you confidence, and I think that is all the stuff that will prepare us to continue to escalate the fight as we continue.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for that. I think Enver Villa has kind of summed it up for us quite nicely when they said, I find teachers are ready to strike. They just want it to be real and not a ploy. They want to go out and win completely, not half measures. I think that we're going to take that, and Laura Walton, Barbara Madeloni, Melanie Wilson, Laura McCoy, James Hutt, thank you so much for your insights. And I'm really hoping that everyone on the line, can you please make sure you go to the OEWU pledge? Can you please make sure that you can continue to keep in touch with the LEAP and all the education workers? We are fighting to win. We can win this. We will win this. Barbara's shown us how they've already done it in the States. Laura's shown us how we've done it here in Ontario. We can do it here together. We will win.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Solidarity.
Solidarity. We're here with you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.